The road remembers everything, every tire mark, every blood stain washed away by rain, every decision made when turning back wasn't an option. Willow Highway stretched through coastal Oregon like a scar across old skin, empty and forgotten, except by those with nowhere else to go. 6 motorcycles moved through October mist, their formation so tight it could only come from men who'd learned to trust each other when trust meant survival. The sound rolled across abandoned logging camps and shuttered gas stations, a mechanical thunder that said someone still traveled roads the world had given up on. James Morrison rode lead. At 62, Hawk's hands were steadier on motorcycle grips than they'd been holding a newborn daughter 4 decades ago. The Purple Heart keychain swinging from his ignition caught weak sunlight filtering through Douglas fir. Behind him, 5 brothers followed with the precision of men who'd executed combat maneuvers in jungles and deserts and came home to discover civilian life didn't issue operating manuals. William Patterson held second position, medical crosspatch visible on his vest shoulder. Doc had pronounced men dead and brought them back across 3 tours in Vietnam, his hands still remembering how to find pulses when everyone else saw corpses. Robert Vandenberg rode third, his massive Dutch frame, making the bike look small. He'd fled Amsterdam at 19 to escape a father's fists and found different violence in Korea, the kind with clear enemies and rules of engagement. Miguel Alvarez came next, rosary beads wrapped around his left handlebar, prayers in Spanish still automatic after 56 years. Saint had carried wounded through Nicaraguan mud in 84 unofficial operations that didn't make history books, but left scars official wars never touched. Thomas Cole rode fifth, his weathered black hands gripping throttle with the same determination that had carried him through Mississippi Freedom Summer before the Marine Corps taught him different ways to fight. Preacher had learned early that evil wore many uniforms and courage only had one face. Daniel Whitehorse brought up rear guard, his Lakota grandfather's teachings still sharp at 68. Chief scanned tree lines with eyes trained to spot ambushes. Old instincts never quite retiring, even when the wars did. Their vests carried name tapes from military service, the Iron Sentinels patch centered below. The club had formed 15 years ago at a VA meeting where 6 strangers recognized something in each other that civilians couldn't see, the particular way trauma carved men into shapes that only fit together. Coffee Stop an hour back had been a roadside diner where the waitress eyed their patches with the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned judgment went both ways. "You boys just passing through?" Hawk's response came easy. "Just a Sunday ride, been doing it for years." The waitress refilled coffee that tasted like burnt tire rubber. Iron Sentinels. That a military thing was. Long time ago. Dutch leaned back, making the booth creak. Still is, just different uniform now. She'd left the check without further questions, and they'd paid an exact change before mounting up again. The highway called them back the way it did every Sunday when weather permitted and bodies cooperated. Now the road curved through forests that pressed close on both sides, hemlock and fir, creating walls that swallowed sound. Hawk's hand came up in a fist, the signal sharp and unmistakable. 5 engines cut simultaneously, the formation rolling to stops with parade ground precision. Silence rushed in thick, complete, broken only by cooling metal ticking and wind moving through pine needles. Then a voice, small enough to disappear in the vastness, but desperate enough to cut through everything else. "Please, I need help." The girl stood at the forest edge, one hand gripping a tree trunk like it was the only thing keeping her upright. 9 or 10 years old, dirty blonde hair matted with forest debris, freckles nearly invisible under grime. Her feet were bare and bleeding, coat torn at the shoulder, jeans muddy to the knees. But her eyes held something that stopped Hawk mid-dismount, the kind of emptiness that came when fear burns so hot it consumed everything else. He approached slowly, joints protesting the movement, but training overriding discomfort. "Easy, little one. Nobody's going to hurt you. What's your name?" The girl's fingers tightened on bark. "Katie." Doc moved forward with his medical bag movements telegraphed and non-threatening. "Katie, I'm going to check if you are hurt. Just a quick look. That okay?" The smallest nod. Dutch gestured sharply, and Saint and Chief spread out without a word, establishing a perimeter security with the automatic efficiency of men who'd done it 1,000 times in places where seconds mattered. Preacher positioned himself to watch the road, his body blocking sight lines to Katie. Doc knelt, checking pulse and pupils with practiced gentleness. "Can you tell us what happened?" Katie's gaze flickered toward the highway, then back to Hawk. My stepdad said we were going camping, but he made me wait in the truck. For hours, I heard him on the phone. Her voice cracked on the last word, and Doc wrapped a water bottle from his pack. Katie drank without seeming to notice, her attention locked on Hawk's face like she was searching for something she couldn't name. What did you hear, Katie? He said someone was coming to pick up the package. That's what he called me. She pulled a photograph from her coat pocket, the paper worn soft from handling. A woman with Katie's eyes smiled out from a beach scene standing next to a younger version of the girl. Both looked happy in the way people do when they don't know happiness has an expiration date. This is my mom, Beth. She died last year. Hawk took the photograph, carefully studying it the way he'd once studied intelligence briefings, where detail meant the difference between missions accomplished and body bags. The woman had laugh lines and sunlightened hair and the kind of smile that reached her eyes. He handed it back, watching Katie clutch it against her chest. Your mom told you something before she died. It wasn't a question. Katie's eyes widened slightly, then filled with tears that she blinked back with visible effort. She said, if anyone ever tries to hurt me, I should run. Find good men, men with old eyes who've seen too much to lie. Katie looked directly at Hawk, and the weight of that gaze felt heavier than any pack he'd ever carried through hostile territory. Are you good men? The question landed like incoming fire. Saint crossed himself. Dutch's massive hands curled into fists. Preacher's jaws set in a way that promised violence if needed. Chief's scanning never stopped, but his posture shifted into something harder. Doc's fingers stilled on Katie's wrist, his face going carefully blank the way medics learned when wounds were too terrible for reactions. Hawk's training kept his voice level. Yes, Katie, we're good men, and you're safe now. Movement killed the moment. Branches snapped in the forest, and a man stumbled out between the pines. Mid-40s, gaunt in the way that spoke of substances or missed meals, flannel shirt buttoned wrong, jeans stained with old oil. When Ray Sullivan saw Katie, relief and rage fought for control of his face. Katie. Thank God. Katie's hand shot to the back of Hawk's vest, her grip desperate. Hawk stood slowly, positioning himself between child and man. Dutch and Saint moved to flank without being asked, 6 old warriors falling into defensive formation as naturally as breathing. Ray tried a smile that didn't reach bloodshot eyes. Gentlemen appreciate you finding her, but she's my daughter. Stepdaughter. The correction came flat. Ray's smile died. Legally, it's the same thing. Look, she gets confused sometimes. Wanders off. I turn my back for 1 minute. She's got bruises on her arms. Fresh ones. Finger-shaped. Dutch's voice carried no room for argument. Ray's attempt at explanation died on his lips. She fell. Climbs trees. You know how kids' Doc's authority came from decades of distinguishing wounds from accidents. I was a combat medic for 30 years. Those are grip marks from adult hands. Defensive wounds on her forearms. Someone grabbed her hard enough to leave impressions. Ray's veneer cracked like cheap paint in cold weather. You don't understand. I'm in trouble. Bad people. I owe them money. The confession spilled out before he could stop it, and Hawk saw the moment Ray realized what he'd admitted. The man's hands trembled, withdrawal or fear, or both. You were going to give them a child. Not a question, just recognition of what Ray's desperation had become. The man's mouth opened and closed, searching for denials that wouldn't come. I didn't have a choice. They'll kill me, Preacher stepped forward, and his voice carried weight that came from walking through fire to pull out wounded. There's always a choice. I chose to walk through flames in Da Nang to save men I barely knew. You chose to sell a girl like she was a used car. Saint's accent thickened with anger. My village in Nicaragua, we had a word for men like you. Cobarde. Coward. Chief spoke quietly, but every word landed like a hammer. In my nation, hurting a child means you're no longer a man. You're prey we hunt. Ray backed up 1 step, 2, then turned and ran. Dutch started forward, but Hawk's hand stopped him. Let him go. We get her somewhere safe first. Ray made it 50 yards before his legs gave out. He collapsed against a boulder, sobbing loud enough to echo off trees. They're coming. Today. 3 p.m. If I don't deliver her, they'll kill me. Hawk checked his watch. 1:45. Who's coming? Men who make me look like a saint. The admission hung in cold air. Katie's fingers dug deeper into Hawk's vest, and he could feel her shaking through the leather. The sentinels exchanged glances, decades of combat experience, allowing communication without words. Dutch wanted to involve law enforcement, his expression said so clearly. Chief's eyes communicated the nearest sheriff was 40 miles away, with response times measured in geological epochs. Doc's face carried doubt about foster systems that lost children in paperwork. Saint's crossed arms suggested more direct solutions. Preacher struggled visibly, his hand unconsciously touching the worn Bible in his vest pocket. We can't take the law into our own hands. That's not who we are. Hawk heard uncertainty in Preacher's voice, the sound of a man whose convictions were being tested by reality that didn't care about philosophy. Maybe it's who we need to be. This once. Katie's small voice cut through debate. My mom said the police didn't help when she tried to leave him. She said sometimes the only law that matters is good men willing to stand. She held up her mother's photograph again, the woman's face a silent witness to failures that had led to this moment. The child speaks wisdom. Chief's pronouncement ended discussion. Dutch walked to his bike, checking legal firearms locked in his saddlebag, weapons carried within every regulation, but ready for use outside all of them. Doc inventoried medical supplies with practiced efficiency, his mind already categorizing what injuries might come and how to treat them. Saint and Preacher moved off to scout terrain, identifying defensive positions and escape routes, with the casual expertise of men who'd done this before when the stakes were foreign villages instead of American highways. Chief made calls on his phone, speaking rapid Lakota to contacts across state lines who owed him favors older than some of the trees surrounding them. Hawk stayed with Katie. When the others were occupied, she looked up at him with eyes too old for her face. Were you in a war? 3 of them? Did you win? We completed our missions. Winning's different. Did you get scared every single day? But you still fought, because the man next to me needed me, and I needed him. That's what makes you stand when every instinct says run. Katie absorbed this, her small face serious with consideration beyond her years. Hawk pulled out his wallet, extracting a photograph worn soft at the edges. A young Marine in dress blues stood next to a teenage girl with his eyes and her mother's smile both frozen in a moment before time taught them costs neither could afford. This is my daughter, Angela. She'd be 38 now. Where is she? I don't know. Her mother and I divorced when Angela was 12. I was deployed too much. Missed birthdays, recitals, parent-teacher conferences, award ceremonies, first dates, graduations. By the time I retired, Angela didn't want to know me anymore. Last I heard, she was in California, married, maybe kids. I wouldn't know. She stopped returning my calls 8 years ago. That's sad. It's earned. I chose the Corps over my family. Thought I was serving something bigger, and maybe I was. But I lost what mattered most. Can't get that back now. But maybe I can make sure you don't lose what matters to you. Hawk stared at the photograph, memorizing details he'd already memorized 1,000 times. The way Angela's smile was just slightly crooked, how her hand rested on his arm, the pride in both their faces before pride became something neither could afford. Katie showed him her mother's picture again, their family photographs facing each other like mirrors of different failures. Her name was Elizabeth. Everyone called her Beth. She was a 3rd-grade teacher. She loved sunflowers and old movies, black and white ones where people talk fast and problems got solved in 90 minutes. When she got sick, Ray changed, started drinking, gambling. She told me before she died that I was strong, stronger than I knew, and someday when I needed help, I'd know who to trust. She said, trust the men with old eyes. They've seen too much to lie about what matters. Katie looked directly at Hawk. You have old eyes. The observation cut deeper than any wound he'd taken in combat. Hawk carefully folded his photograph and returned it to his wallet, taking time to compose himself. Katie, I'm going to make you a promise. And I've only broken one promise in my entire life, and I've regretted it every day since. I promise you by the time the sun sets today, you'll be safe, no matter what it costs. What if it costs too much? For a child, there's no such thing as too much. Engine sounds killed the moment 2 vehicles approaching from the south. A black SUV with windows tinted beyond legal limits led, followed by a pickup truck that had seen better decades and hadn't maintained them well. Both vehicles pulled to stops 50 yards out, engines idling, making no attempt at stealth or subtlety. The SUV's door opened, and a man emerged wearing a suit that looked wrong in the wilderness. Vincent Cole moved with military bearing, despite civilian clothes his age somewhere in the 50s, eyes scanning the scene with professional assessment that said he'd done this before. When he saw the Iron Sentinels formation, something like recognition crossed his face. Well now, Iron Sentinels, I know that patch. My old man was a Marine, served in Nam. Then he'd be ashamed of you. Vincent's smile held no warmth. Probably. He was a judgmental son of a bitch who died angry at everyone, including himself. He walked closer and Hawk cataloged the man's movement-controlled aggression, automatic threat assessment, the particular way former military moved even when they had gone wrong. Dishonorable discharge written in every gesture. Ray called me, said there's a complication with the delivery. Dutch stepped forward, his bulk blocking sightlines to Katie. There's no delivery. The girl stays with us. Vincent laughed, but the sound held no humor. You're what, 65? You think 6 old men on motorcycles scare me? I've got 12 people within 5 minutes of here. You've got arthritis and bad knees, Chief's voice carried across the space. Should we scare you? Vincent's laugh died. Saint's hand rested on his belt. Preacher's rifle never wavered from low-ready position. We've got something else. Vincent's posture shifted slightly, recognizing real threat beneath old age. What's that nothing left to lose? Preacher's words settled over the scene like snow, quiet, inexorable, covering everything. 6 old men who'd survived wars and decades of hard living, who'd lost more than they kept, who'd already made peace with mortality. Vincent's confidence wavered. This is business. The girl is worth $200,000. You're interfering with commerce. She's a child. She's inventory, merchandise. And merchandise that's already been paid for, which means I have a contractual obligation to deliver. Doc's medical training vanished, replaced by something colder. I've sewn up 1,000 men in my life, saved hundreds, held them while they died when I couldn't. And I learned something about the ones who talk about people like they're objects. They bleed just as red when you cut them. Want to test that theory? Vincent opened his mouth to respond, but Chief's phone rang. The old Lakota answered, listened without speaking, and disconnected. When he spoke, absolute certainty filled every word. Vincent Cole, dishonorably discharged, 1998 conduct unbecoming. Trafficking charges in 2003 dismissed on technicality when your witness disappeared. 3 known aliases. Active warrant in Idaho for failure to appear. How the hell I made calls. To people with long memories and databases that never forget. People who watch men like you because sooner or later you always slip. Police are en route. Sheriff Martinez is 7 minutes out. Oregon State Police are 12. FBI field office in Portland has been notified and is scrambling a team. Chief held up his phone showing a screen with actual police dispatch communications visible. Vincent's face went through several emotions before settling on controlled rage. This isn't over. Ray owes us $85,000. One way or another, we collect what's ours, and you old men just signed your death warrants. He retreated to the SUV, his men following. Engines roared and both vehicles disappeared back down the highway. But the threat lingered like smoke that wouldn't clear. Ray remained where Crusher knew where Dutch had secured him, handcuffed to a tree, with zip ties that bit into skin. The Sentinels turned their attention to the broken man, who looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him. You want to know why? Fine, I'll tell you everything. Ray's voice cracked desperation, overriding self-preservation. Beth was dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4 by the time they found it. No insurance because I'd let the policy lapse gambling. Medical bills hit $400,000 in 6 months. I took a loan from the wrong people. Thought I'd pay it back with her life insurance when she died. He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. But she lived longer than the doctors predicted. 6 months longer. The bills kept coming. The interest kept compounding. I couldn't pay. Vincent's people came to collect. First they wanted the house, then the car. Then they saw Katie playing in the yard, and they made an offer. $200,000, enough to clear the debt and walk away alive. I said no. I swear to God I said no at first. But they showed me pictures of what they'd do. To me, to Katie, detailed photographs from their previous work. I convinced myself that if I handed her over, at least she'd be alive somewhere. I know that's bullshit. I know it. But I'm a coward who told himself lies because lies were easier than standing up. Saint moved closer, his voice soft but caring. I had a brother, drug addict, stole from family, lied to everyone, hurt people who loved him. One day he overdosed in a motel bathroom. I found him, revived him. You know what he said when he came to? Why did you save me? I told him. Because you can still choose differently. He never did. Died 6 months later. Same motel, same drugs. You're like my brother, given chances, wasting them. But here's your last one. What do you want? Tell us everything about Vincent's operation. Names, locations, schedules, how he moves people, who's on his payroll. Then you turn yourself in. Full confession. Maybe if there's any decency left in you, you help save other kids from what you tried to do to yours. Ray nodded, the movement jerky and desperate. Okay, okay, I'll tell you everything. Sirens approached from the north and a patrol car marked with county insignia appeared around the curve. Sheriff Martinez emerged, a woman in her 50s, with competent eyes and the kind of bearing that came from years of dealing with humanity's worst offerings, while maintaining belief that good still existed somewhere. She took statements with professional efficiency, arrested Ray with detached precision, and then turned to Katie with a gentleness that transformed her entire demeanor. Honey, you need to come with me. Social Services is sending someone to meet us at the station. We'll get you somewhere safe. Katie's hand found Hawk's again. Can I stay with them? Martinez's expression softened further. They're not licensed foster parents, sweetie, but I promise we'll find you a good home. You have my word on that. Then license us. Dutch's voice carried across the clearing. Martinez almost smiled, the expression fleeting but genuine. Doesn't work that way, but I'll make sure she's placed with good people. Katie, these men just saved your life. I won't dishonor that by putting you somewhere unsafe. Hawk knelt one final time, meeting Katie at eye level. I'll check on you tomorrow. First thing in the morning, you have my word. Katie studied his face, searching for lies and finding none. She wrapped her arms around his neck in a hug so tight it threatened circulation, and when she pulled back, tears streaked her dirty cheeks. You promise forever, forever. A social worker arrived in a sedan that had seen too many miles, a warm-faced woman named Sharon Reeves, who'd spent 23 years with Child Protective Services and still somehow maintained faith in humanity. She spoke to Katie in tones that suggested decades of experience with traumatized children, gentle but not patronizing, honest without being cruel. Katie went with her, but looked back 3 times before the car rounded a curve and disappeared. The sentinels watched until even the dust settled, 6 old men standing in formation around an empty space where a child had been. Hawk's phone rang as they prepared to mount up. Unknown number, he answered with the caution of a man who'd received too many midnight calls about casualties. Yeah, the voice had been electronically distorted, pitched low and mechanical, unrecognizable. You have something that belongs to us. We've been very patient, but patience has limits. Return the girl by midnight, or consequences will follow. Starting with the foster family, then the social worker, then you, 6 hours, old man. Don't waste them. The line went dead. Hawk stared at the phone, his hands steady despite ice forming in his gut. Doc touched his shoulder, the question unspoken. We've got a problem. A big one. He repeated the threat word for word, his memory trained to retain intelligence, even when every instinct screamed to forget. The sentinels absorbed this in silence, each man processing implications through the lens of their particular expertise. Saint spoke first. They're serious. This isn't intimidation. This is a schedule. Chief nodded. They've already identified where Katie's going, which means they have someone inside the system. Preacher's face hardened. Then we can't trust the system to protect her. Dutch cracked his knuckles, the sound like small arms fire in the quiet. So we protect her ourselves. Doc checked his medical bag, already mentally cataloging supplies they'd need for what was coming. We'll need a safe location. Defensible, off-grid. Chief pulled out his phone. I know a place. My cousin's hunting lodge. 90 miles northeast. No cell service. Solar power. Only one road in. Hawk mounted his bike, the others following suit. Engines roared to life, the sound no longer seeming loud enough for what they faced. We've got 6 hours. Let's not waste them. They rode toward Portland as the sun climbed toward its apex, 6 old warriors heading into battle one more time. Behind them, the highway swallowed the space where they'd been. Ahead, the road curved into distance where a child waited for promises to be kept or broken. And in the forest beside Willow Highway, Ray Sullivan sat in a patrol car and wondered if confession would buy redemption or just a cleaner cell in hell. 10 days crawled past like wounded animals searching for somewhere to die. Katie Sullivan occupied a guest room in the Davis household on Cedar Grove subdivision, a neighborhood where identical houses lined streets named after trees that had been cut down to build them. Frank Davis worked construction when his back allowed it. Dorothy taught kindergarten with the patience of someone who genuinely loved children, but whose capacity had been tested by fostering 17 of them over 12 years. Their home already sheltered 4 other foster kids ranging from 6 to 14 each, carrying damage that manifested in different ways. The house smelled like industrial cleaner and frozen dinners reheated past recognition. Katie's room had yellow walls and a window overlooking a street where nothing ever happened except scheduled garbage pickup and neighbors who waved without stopping to talk. She spent hours touching the leather bracelet on her wrist, wondering if motorcycle men kept promises better than stepfathers did. Experience taught her that promises were just sounds people made when they wanted you to stop asking difficult questions. But the bracelet felt different, substantial, like it carried weight that couldn't be measured in ounces. The Iron Sentinels gathered at their clubhouse, a converted VFW hall on Portland's industrial district edge, where rent stayed cheap because nobody wanted to be surrounded by warehouses and train tracks. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over walls covered with photographs from wars that kept receding further into history. Young men frozen in black and white stared out from frames, their eyes holding certainties that experience would eventually corrode. Hawk stood near a topographical map of Oregon, his finger tracing routes, while others occupied mismatched chairs salvaged from various sources over the years. The table bore coffee rings and knife scars witnessed to countless meetings about problems that never quite got solved. Sheriff Martinez's cruiser pulled up outside before noon on day 10. She entered without knocking, her face carrying news that nobody wanted but everyone expected. Ray confessed to everything, gave us names, locations, financial records, communication methods. Vincent Cole's organization is bigger than we thought. FBI's taken over the investigation. Assets, frozen warrants issued across 3 states. She paused and Hawk recognized the expression of someone delivering bad news in installments. But here's our problem. Ray's the only witness who can directly connect Vincent to specific crimes. Documentary evidence is strong, but prosecutors want living testimony to seal convictions. And Ray's in county jail with general population because we don't have protective custody facilities. Dutch's voice went flat. You put him in with how many inmates? 43, including 3 men with known connections to trafficking networks. Doc leaned back. He'll be dead within a week. I know. I've requested immediate transfer to federal custody, but paperwork takes time. Could be 3 days. Could be 10. Preacher's hands folded together. Time he doesn't have. Martinez reached into her jacket, extracting an evidence bag containing a single sheet of paper. There's more. Katie's caseworker received this 2 days ago. Didn't report it until this morning. Hawk took the bag. Laser-printed text on plain white stock, anonymous and generic. The girl has borrowed property. Property will be reclaimed, no signature, no threats beyond the implied. When no time frame given, could be tomorrow, could be next month. We've increased patrols around the Davis home, but I can't station an officer there 24/7. Budget doesn't allow it. Saint's accent thickened. She's bait. They know we'll come for her. Chief nodded slowly. They're counting on it. Force us to move, then intercept. Hawk folded the letter back into its bag. Then we don't give them what they expect. Martinez left after delivering warnings about legal consequences of vigilantism, words everyone pretended to hear while planning exactly what she'd warned against. The moment her cruiser cleared the lot, Chief pulled out a burner phone and started making calls. His network spread across the Pacific Northwest, built from decades of Native American veterans who'd learned to watch each other's backs when the government forgot they existed. Doc contacted VFW chapters and American Legion posts with questions that seemed casual, but extracted precise intelligence. Where did Vincent recruit? Who supplied his logistics? What routes did he use? Saint reached through his church's extensive Latino community, where immigrants notice everything because survival demanded constant awareness. Preacher used connections from civil rights, organizing days, calling activists who'd never stop fighting systems designed to grind up the vulnerable. Dutch worked differently. He called his daughter in Seattle, a corporate attorney who moonlighted defending immigrants pro bono, and knew how to navigate bureaucracies that intentionally obscured themselves. Within 4 hours, intelligence coalesced into actionable information that would have taken law enforcement weeks to compile through official channels. Vincent Cole ran 15 people across Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. Main operations hub occupied a warehouse in Portland's industrial district, the kind of building that looked abandoned until you noticed recent electrical work and security cameras disguised as broken fixtures. 3 safe houses rotated inventory every 2 weeks on schedules that shifted to prevent pattern recognition. Next rotation was scheduled in 6 days. Katie would be priority acquisition once she became available through official channels, which meant someone inside Child Protective Services was feeding Vincent information. The Sentinels sat in their customary circle, the formation automatic after 15 years of weekly meetings. But this time the enemy wasn't an ocean away or a memory to process. This time the threat had a face, and that face belonged to a 9-year-old girl who trusted them with everything she had left. Preacher stood and walked to the window, his back to the group. His shoulders carried tension, visible even through his leather vest. We're discussing preemptive action, extracting a child from legal custody before any crime has been committed against her. That's kidnapping by definition. That's vigilantism by any standard. Hawk's voice carried no judgment. That's also survival, hers specifically. Dutch shifted his weight, the chair creaking. In Korea, we didn't wait for the enemy to fire first. We eliminated threats before they materialized. That's how you win wars. Doc's medical precision applied itself to moral calculations. This isn't Korea. This is Oregon. There are laws specifically designed to prevent exactly what we're considering. Laws that exist for good reasons. Saint's response came quiet but firm. Laws that already failed Katie once. Laws that put her in a system where Vincent has access. Chief rose and stood beside Preacher at the window, both men silhouetted against gray light filtering through grimy glass. My grandfather taught me that when wolves threaten the village, you hunt them before they hunt you. Not after they've killed, before. Because prevention saves more lives than retaliation ever could. Preacher turned, and Hawk saw the internal struggle written across Weather's features. 40 years of nonviolent resistance, marching and organizing, and believing systems could change if pushed correctly. All of it being weighed against one child's immediate danger. Mississippi, summer of 1964. I was 22 years old, full of righteousness and absolute certainty that love would conquer hate if we just demonstrated it loudly enough. We registered Black voters, taught reading, built community centers, and every night the Klan burned crosses and made threats while police stood by watching. His voice dropped lower, each word carefully measured. Then they burned a church, Mount Zion Methodist, with people inside. 3 of my friends died screaming while officers stood 50 yards away and said they couldn't act without evidence of a crime in progress. That's when I learned evil wins when good men wait for permission to act. Silence absorbed this. Hawk had known pieces of Preacher's history, but never the core of what had forged him into the man he'd become. Every member of this circle carried scars from crucibles that had shaped them. Preacher's just ran deeper than most because he'd chosen his battles while others had battles chosen for them. We extract Katie. We take her somewhere Vincent can't reach. We hold until the FBI finishes building their case and Vincent's network collapses without leadership. Then we bring her back. Doc nodded. Dutch cracked his knuckles. Saint crossed himself. Chief pulled up satellite imagery on a tablet that looked incongruous in his weathered hands. Preacher sat back down, his decision made through reasoning that only he fully understood but everyone respected. The plan took shape over 6 hours of detailed work that demonstrated why they'd all survived combat when younger men with better reflexes hadn't. Chief's cousin owned a hunting lodge 90 miles northeast, built in the 70s and maintained through family obligation more than actual use. Solar panels provided off-grid power. A spring-fed well meant water independent of municipal systems. One road in meant one approach to defend. Surrounding forests provided concealment and escape routes. They'd stock it with supplies, establish communications protocols, set perimeter security, and wait for Vincent to make his move or the FBI to finish theirs, whichever came first. Midnight extraction required cooperation from an unexpected source. Dorothy Davis met them at her back door, her expression set in the grim determination of someone who'd spent 20 years as an army wife, watching her husband deploy into danger while she held together everything he left behind. She knew you'd come. Been ready since dinner. Katie appeared in the hallway fully dressed, small backpack already packed. She looked at Hawk without surprise. I knew you'd come. Dutch took her bag and secured it to his bike with practiced efficiency. He was the steadiest rider, the one whose hands never shook even when his body protested the miles. Katie climbed behind him, wrapping small arms around his massive torso. 6 motorcycles rolled out of Cedar Grove like ghost engines, barely louder than whispers. Lights off until they cleared residential streets. The lodge materialized from darkness 2 hours later, exactly where Chief's directions placed it. Solid construction from an era when buildings were meant to last. Katie settled into a bedroom that smelled of cedar and old wood smoke while the Sentinels established defensive positions with military precision. Motion sensors constructed from hardware store electronics, tripwires using fishing line and bells, firing positions identified and marked, escape routes memorized and rehearsed. The kind of preparation that came from men who'd learned the hard way that chaos favored those who'd prepared for it. Chief found Katie on the porch as dawn broke, her knees pulled to her chest. He lowered himself beside her with the careful movements of a man whose body remembered every helicopter he'd jumped from. Why do they call you Chief? I'm Lakota. My grandfather was a chief, led our people through hard times after the government decided our land belonged to someone else. I'm just a man trying to honor his memory. Were you scared in war? Every warrior who survives is scared. Fear keeps you alive. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is acting despite fear because something matters more than his safety. Am I a warrior? Chief considered this with the seriousness it deserved. You ran when staying meant harm. You survived when giving up seemed easier. You asked strangers for help when pride could have kept you silent. Yes, you're a warrior. Doc spent the morning teaching Katie basic first aid, his medic's instincts unable to stay dormant even in crisis. Small hands practiced tying bandages on strips of cloth, while Doc watched with the patience he'd developed training corpsmen who'd have to use these skills under fire. Do you have kids? Had a son, Jason. Lost him to drugs 10 years ago. Overdose in a motel room 3 states away. By the time I got the call, he'd been dead for 2 days. I'm sorry. Doc's hands stilled on the demonstration bandage. Me too, every day. But you know what I learned from losing him? We don't save people to replace who we lost. We save them because it's who we're meant to be. The saving is the point, not the outcome. Saint took Katie outside after lunch to show her the vegetable garden Chief's cousin maintained. Plants grew in neat rows despite the season, protected by a makeshift greenhouse. Saint's rosary beads clicked softly as he walked rhythm that had followed him since childhood. You pray a lot, I do, because I don't trust my own judgment. Too many mistakes in my past to rely on myself alone. Does God answer sometimes? Usually through other people. Like 6 men on motorcycles stopping for a girl on an empty highway. Maybe that was an answer to your mother's prayer. Maybe to yours. Maybe to mine. Katie touched the beads, feeling worn smoothness of decades of prayer. Saint removed them and placed them in her small hand. Keep these. When you're scared, count them. Each bead is a reminder you're not alone. Sheriff Martinez's cruiser appeared at the lodge on day 3 of their vigil. Hawk met her in the clearing, noting immediately that she'd come alone and in a personal vehicle, not her official cruiser. We need to talk, privately. She gestured toward the forest edge. Hawk followed his instincts, prickling with warning. I've been reviewing Katie's case file. Something doesn't add up. The transfer paperwork that got filed, it was expedited through channels that normally take weeks. Someone pushed it through in 72 hours. That doesn't happen unless someone with access and authority wants it to happen. You think there's a mole. I think there might be. I've been going through personnel records, looking for financial irregularities, unusual behavior. And I found something. She pulled out her phone showing him bank statements she had no official authority to access. Deputy Williams, he's been receiving monthly deposits of $10,000 from an LLC that doesn't seem to exist beyond paperwork. Deposits started 18 months ago. Williams was at the original scene. When we found Katie, I know. He was also the one who filed the initial report, and he's been assigned to Katie's case as liaison with Child Protective Services. Where is he now? Martinez's jaw tightened. He requested today off, said he had a family emergency, but his ex-wife says she hasn't heard from him in 6 months and they don't have kids. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Hawk turned back toward the lodge. He knows where we are. Martinez followed. How? Because he's been tracking your movements. If you're here, it means you found us, which means he knows you found us. How long have you been driving 90 minutes? They'd have started moving the moment you left town. We've got maybe an hour before they arrive. Martinez pulled her service weapon and checked the magazine, her movements automatic and grim. Then we better be ready. Inside the lodge, Hawk gathered the sentinels and delivered the news in clipped sentences. Deputy Williams was Vincent's inside man. Martinez had compromised their location by coming here. Vincent's people were en route. How many? Martinez checked her phone. Based on what we know about Vincent's operation, he can field 12 to 15 people on short notice. You've got 6. And me, 7 against 15. We've faced worse odds. Dutch's observation was factual rather than boastful. Chief began checking weapons. Doc inventoried medical supplies. Saint and Preacher reinforced barricades. Martinez called for backup she knew wouldn't arrive in time. Katie emerged from the bedroom, her face pale but determined. I should leave. If I'm not here, they won't attack. Hawk knelt to her level. They'll attack anyway, because we know too much, and they need to silence us before the FBI closes in. So this is my fault. No, this is Vincent's fault. This is William's fault. This is a system's fault that let wolves get close to sheep. But it's not your fault. The phone call came at 2 p.m., Martinez's official number. She answered on speaker. Deputy Williams' voice came through tinny and strained. Sheriff, I know you're at the lodge. I know the sentinels have the girl. Vincent just wants her back. Nobody else needs to get hurt. Martinez's response was ice. Williams, you're under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and accessory to human trafficking. Surrender yourself immediately. A different voice came on the line. Vincent's, Sheriff Martinez. I respect law enforcement. My father was a cop in Seattle before the bottle got him. So I understand you've got a job to do, but you're interfering with business arrangements that precede your involvement. Stand down, turn over the girl, and everyone goes home. Martinez's finger hovered over the disconnect button. Vincent, this is Sheriff Martinez. You're surrounded by warrants and wanted in multiple states. The FBI is en route. Surrender now and I'll ensure you get due process. Vincent laughed. FBI is 90 minutes out. I'm 9 minutes out. Math doesn't favor you. The line went dead. Hawk checked his watch and looked at his brothers. They're coming. Positions. Each man moved to predetermined locations with practiced efficiency. Dutch took the main entrance, his bulk position where it would do the most good. Doc set up a triage station in the interior room farthest from windows. Saint and Chief covered flanks, their fields of fire overlapping to eliminate blind spots. Preacher held the rear approach, the position that required trusting your brothers to hold the line while you watch their backs. Martinez stayed with Katie, her service weapon drawn, looking more terrified than any combat veteran in the room, but staying nonetheless. The convoy appeared at 2:13 p.m., 4 vehicles approaching without subtlety or tactical nuance. They parked in a loose perimeter and disgorged men carrying weapons that hadn't been purchased at sporting goods stores. Vincent stepped out of the lead vehicle wearing the same suit from Willow Highway, looking like a businessman who'd taken a wrong turn into someone else's war. His voice boomed across the clearing through a megaphone that echoed off trees. I believe we have business to conclude. Last chance to do this the easy way. Hawk's response came through a window. We're closed for business. Vincent shook his head with theatrical disappointment. That's unfortunate. My people are former military, same as you, younger, better equipped, and more numerous. This only ends one way. Maybe, but that way goes through us first. Suit yourself. Vincent stepped back and his people opened fire. The lodge exploded into chaos, bullets punching through wood that was decorative rather than defensive, windows shattering the air, filling with the smell of cordite and splintering pine. The Sentinels returned fire with controlled precision, each shot deliberate and economical in the way of men who'd learned ammunition management and in places where resupply meant helicopters that might not come. Chief took the first hit around, catching his shoulder and spinning him into the wall. Martinez grabbed him and dragged him toward Doc's triage area while maintaining fire with her offhand. "Your hit." Chief's face was white with shock, but his voice remained steady. "I'm Lakota. Takes more than one bullet to stop us." Doc worked on him while tracking the tactical situation, his hands doing what they'd done for decades, while his mind cataloged who might need him next. Dutch used the heavy table as cover, firing from behind an oak that was old enough to stop rounds that wood from this century couldn't. His shots found targets with the grim efficiency of a man who'd learned marksmanship in Korea when ammunition was precious and second chances were rare. Saint held the left flank with Preacher, both men firing in coordinated rhythm that spoke of shared experience. But Vincent's people had youth in numbers, and they pressed forward with the confidence of people who'd done this before and won. A round caught Preacher in the chest, punching through Kevlar that was 20 years past its rated lifespan. He staggered but didn't fall, muscle memory keeping his rifle steady even as blood bloomed across his shirt. Hawk saw it happen from across the room. Time compressed and expanded simultaneously, the way it always did when someone you loved took mortal wounds. He was moving before conscious thought engaged, crossing the floor, while return fire tracked his movement. Preacher slid down the wall, legs no longer supporting weight. Blood bubbled at his lips. Hawk reached him, lowering him gently to the floor. Did she get out safe? In the interior room with Martinez. Good, that's all that matters. Preacher's hand found Hawk's arm grip, weakening with each heartbeat. Tell her old men can still do right. Tell her we stood for something that mattered. Tell her. His eyes closed, his chest stilled. Thomas Cole's war was finally over-ended, not in jungles or highways, but in a hunting lodge defending a child he had known for less than 2 weeks. The battle that had defined his entire life. Sirens cut through gunfire. Helicopter rotors beat the air. Floodlights turned afternoon into artificial day. A voice boomed across the clearing through speakers that made Vincent's megaphone sound like a child's toy. "This is the FBI, drop your weapons, everyone on the ground." Now Vincent's people scattered like insects when you lifted the rock they'd hidden under. Some surrendered immediately, hands raised. Others fled into forest where they'd be hunted down over the following hours. Williams attempted to run, but Martinez tackled him herself, years of frustration channeling into the takedown. Vincent stood frozen in the middle of the clearing, watching his organization collapse around him like a house built from cards. But rage overrode survival instinct. He pulled a pistol from beneath his jacket and advanced on the lodge with murder in his eyes. "If I can't have her, nobody can." Hawk stepped through the doorway unarmed, placing himself between Vincent and the building where Katie sheltered. "It's over." "Not yet." Vincent raised the pistol, sighting on Katie's silhouette visible through the shattered window. Hawk moved without thinking, decades of training taking control. He launched himself forward as the gun discharged the round, passing through space where he'd been standing a heartbeat before. They collided, two men whose paths had diverged at some crucial junction. Hawk's hands found Vincent's gun arm, forcing it skyward. Another shot went wild. Then Chief's rifle spoke once from a window position, his offhand, his dominant shoulder useless, and Vincent's eyes went wide with surprise and pain. He felt the gun clattering across frozen ground. Hawk stood over him, chest heaving. Vincent's lips moved, trying to form final words that died with him. FBI agents swarmed the compound. Sentinels dropped weapons and raised hands. Katie emerged from the lodge, Chief's turquoise stone clutched in one hand, Saint's rosary in the other. She saw Preacher's body being covered with a sheet and understood what it meant. The cost of her survival lay still and growing cold on wooden floorboards that had witnessed violence they'd never been designed for. Katie wanted to scream or cry or rage against unfairness, but she was 9 years old and exhausted beyond measure. So she stood there while adults processed crime scenes and collected evidence and tried to make sense of things that would never make sense. Hawk found her an hour later as the sun descended toward mountains that didn't care about human struggles. He sat beside her on the porch steps without speaking. Sometimes silence said more than words. Did Preacher have kids too? Both grown. They hadn't spoken to him in years. He told me once he'd burned too many bridges trying to save the world, never learned how to save his own family. Like you and Angela. Like me and Angela. Katie leaned against his shoulder. Is this what winning feels like? Hawk watched agents load Vincent's body into a vehicle marked with official insignia. I don't know, but you're alive. And for men like us, that's the only victory that counts. Portland General Hospital's trauma ward smelled like disinfectant layered over something older and less clean. Chief occupied bed 7, his shoulder wrapped in bandages that would need changing twice daily for weeks. Dutch sat in the chair beside him, his own injuries limited to bruised ribs and a gash across his forearm that had required 18 stitches. Saint had been released after observation, the bullet through his thigh missing bone and major vessels through luck that men their age had stopped expecting. Katie visited on the second day, escorted by a victim advocate named Sarah Chen, who specialized in trafficking cases and carried the particular wariness of someone who'd seen too many children hurt by adults who should have protected them. The girl moved through hospital corridors with careful steps like someone testing whether floors would hold. When she saw Chief and Dutch alive and complaining about hospital food, tension drained from her shoulders. Did we win? Chief's voice carried the rasp of pain medication wearing thin. You're standing here asking that question instead of being sold to monsters. Yes, we won. Katie approached Dutch's bedside, her small hand finding his massive one. I'm sorry you got hurt because of me. Dutch's expression softened in ways his frame suggested shouldn't be possible. Kid, I've been shot at by people who actually knew what they were doing. This was nothing. Besides, you can't hurt a Dutchman with just one bullet. We're built too stubborn. The advocate touched Katie's shoulder gently. We need to go. There are people who want to meet you. Legal people. About what happens next. Katie's face closed down, the brief lightness evaporating like morning fog under harsh sun. Dutch caught Hawk's eye across the room and a conversation happened without words the kind men who'd served together learned to have when speaking would waste precious seconds. This wasn't over. Not by half. Hawk sat in an interview room at the federal building, metal table bolted to floor, two-way mirror, reflecting his exhausted face back at him. FBI Special Agent David Morrison, no relation despite the shared surname, reviewed a file thick enough to stop small caliber rounds. The agent was mid-40s with tired eyes that had cataloged too much human darkness and a wedding ring worn smooth from years of unconscious turning. You killed a man, Vincent Cole. Died from a single gunshot wound fired by Daniel Whitehorse while you were physically engaged with the deceased. Self-defense. He was shooting at a child. Morrison leaned back, studying Hawk with an expression that gave nothing away. You also kidnapped that child from legal custody, engaged in a firefight on private property. One of your people died. 2 more wounded. You understand the charges you're potentially facing? I understand I did what needed doing when the system failed to do it. The agent's pen tapped against the folder in rhythm that suggested this wasn't his first complicated case. You know what my problem is? I've got a daughter. She's 10. If someone tried to hurt her and the system failed, I'd want 6 men like you to show up. But I'm not here to give you a medal. I'm here to build a case that won't get laughed out of court. He opened the folder wider. So tell me everything. From the beginning. Don't leave anything out. And don't lie, because I've already got witness statements from everyone involved, and if your story doesn't match, the prosecutor gets ammunition I can't defend against. Hawk talked for 4 hours, laying out timeline with the precision of a man trained to debrief missions. Morrison took notes, asked clarifying questions, occasionally shook his head at details that strained belief, but matched documentary evidence. Vincent's death fractured the organization like a hammer through glass. Without leadership, the network collapsed into individuals making deals to save themselves from prosecution that suddenly seemed inevitable. Federal prosecutors built cases from the wreckage, connecting dots across 3 states that formed a picture more horrifying with each revealed connection. 22 arrests in the first week. Houses raided from Portland to Sacramento. Servers seized containing records of transactions that treated human beings like livestock. Financial records subpoenaed showing money flowing through shell corporations designed to obscure rather than conduct legitimate business. 14 children recovered from various locations. The youngest was 6 years old. The oldest was 16 but looked 40 in her eyes. They'd been held in conditions that violated every human dignity, warehouse-like inventory waiting for shipment. Katie had been 48 hours from joining them. The media descended with the subtlety of artillery fire. National coverage cable news panels debating vigilantism versus justice op-eds, arguing both sides with passionate certainty. Iron Sentinels became a phrase that meant different things depending on who spoke it. Heroes or criminals depending on whether you trusted systems or had been failed by them. Katie testified in closed-court child psychologists and victim advocates, surrounding her with protections the law should have provided earlier. Judge Patricia Reyes had spent 32 years on the bench and thought she'd seen everything until this case landed on her docket. She was a grandmother who'd raised 4 children and helped raise 6 grandchildren, and she knew the difference between trauma that healed and trauma that scarred permanently. Katie, I need you to tell me what happened in your own words. Take whatever time you need. Nobody's rushing you. The girl's voice started small but grew steadier as she continued finding strength and repetition that testimony provided. She described Ray's descent into desperate criminality. The men who came to the house with cold eyes and calculating expressions. The phone call that made her run. When prosecutors asked her to identify evidence, her small finger remained steady on photographs and documents. Did anyone force you to testify today? Katie's response came without hesitation. Nobody forced me. I'm here because what happened to me is still happening to other kids. If telling my story stops even one of them from going through what I went through, then saying these words out loud is worth how much it hurts to remember. The courtroom went silent. Even the stenographer paused, fingers hovering over keys. Judge Reyes removed her glasses and cleaned them with deliberate care, buying time to compose herself. Young lady, you're very brave. Katie shook her head. I learned from brave men. I'm just trying to be like them. The Sentinels faced charges that could mean decades in federal prison. Kidnapping, conspiracy, assault, manslaughter for Hawk. The public defender assigned to their case took one look at evidence and prosecutors' determination and delivered assessment with brutal honesty. Best I can do is negotiate plea deals. Maybe get sentences down to 10 years if everyone cooperates and shows remorse. But we're not winning this at trial. Dutch started to argue, but the conference room door opened. A woman in her late 30s entered wheeling a litigation bag that suggested preparation for extended legal battle. Professional attire, dark hair pulled back severely, and eyes that held Hawk's face and some ghost of his younger self staring back. I'm Catherine Morrison. I'll be representing the defendants pro bono. All of them. The public defender looked between them, recognizing family resemblance, even without understanding its significance. Hawk's world tilted on its axis. Angela. The name emerged like a prayer and question simultaneously. She set down her bag with controlled precision, the kind of movement people used when emotions threatened to overwhelm professional facades. I got your message. The voice recording you sent before the siege. I sat in my car for 30 minutes with my finger hovering over the delete button, thinking maybe I didn't want to hear whatever excuse you'd come up with this time. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him, maintaining professional distance that couldn't hide tears forming in her eyes. But the subject line, if I don't make it, that made me think maybe this time was different. So I listened. And you sounded different, Dad. Peaceful. Like you'd finally figured out what actually matters instead of what you thought should matter. Why are you here? Because you're facing 25 years for doing something I would have done if I'd had the courage. Because I have 2 kids and now your grandchildren that you don't even know exist, and they deserve to know. Their grandfather isn't the man who chose the Marines over family. He's the man who chose a little girl's life over his own freedom. That's the grandfather I want them to meet. The public defender gathered his materials quietly. Ms. Morrison, with all due respect, this is a complex federal case with multiple defendants and significant public scrutiny. You practice civil rights law, not criminal defense. Civil rights law, which includes defending people when systems fail so catastrophically that direct action becomes the only moral choice. I've spent 15 years building precedent for necessity defense in cases from police brutality to immigration detention. This case fits every criteria I've ever argued. She pulled documents from her bag, spreading them across the conference table with the confidence of someone who'd already wargamed every prosecutorial angle. Imminent harm to a child, documented failure of authorities to act, reasonable belief that immediate intervention was required, good faith attempts to minimize violence and involve proper authorities. And most importantly, outcomes proving the action was necessary 14 children rescued, 22 traffickers, arrested, a network dismantled that law enforcement had failed to touch for 3 years. The public defender studied the documents, then studied Angela, then studied Hawk. He stood and collected his briefcase. She's better than me. You're in good hands. Better hands than I could give you. After he left, silence filled space between father and daughter. Years of hurt and anger and missed opportunities hung in the air like smoke from fires that never fully extinguished. Angela spoke first, her professional mask cracking along seams she'd thought were sealed. I have 2 kids. Sophia's 8. Marcus is 5. Tomorrow. You're a grandfather and you didn't even know because I never told you. Because I was angry for so long that by the time the anger faded into something manageable, the distance felt permanent. Easier to maintain than bridge. What changed? She pulled out her phone, showing him a photograph. 2 children on a playground laughing at something outside the frame. They had Angela's eyes and her smile and something of Hawk's stubborn chin that genetics had transmitted across generations. Sophia asked me last week why she only has 1 grandma when her friends have 2 grandmas and 2 grandpas. I told her you were busy with important things. She looked at me with those eyes that see through adult bullshit and said that sounded like an excuse, not a reason. 8 years old and already calling me on my lies. Angela's voice cracked. Then I heard your message. You saying you'd finally protected someone who needed it, and maybe that counted for something. Maybe that earned a little forgiveness. And I realized Sophia was right. I'd been using anger as an excuse not to forgive. But what you did for Katie, that's not choosing duty over family. That is family, the human family. So I'm here and I'm getting you out, all of you. The trial strategy took shape over 8 weeks of 18-hour days. Angela built her case on necessity defense, arguing that the Sentinels had acted to prevent imminent serious harm when legal alternatives were unavailable or inadequate. She assembled expert witnesses, child psychologists, who explained trauma trafficking specialists, who detailed Vincent's methods, law enforcement officials willing to admit system failures under oath. She documented every moment of Katie's ordeal, creating a timeline that showed exactly how close the girl had come to disappearing into a network where children became commodities measured in dollar amounts rather than human worth. Katie's letter to Judge Reyes became the emotional centerpiece. Angela helped her write it, but the words belonged entirely to Katie's voice. Your Honor, I'm 9 years old. I don't know much about law or courts or how justice works, but I know about right and wrong because my mom taught me before she died. The men who saved me are good. The men who wanted to hurt me were bad. When bad men have guns and plans and money, sometimes good men have to do more than call police and hope for the best. If we punish good men for protecting children when no one else would, what does that teach children, like me, that we're not worth the risk, that adults should just let terrible things happen, because helping us might cause legal problems? Please don't punish them. They're heroes, even if heroes aren't supposed to break rules. Sometimes rules need breaking to save lives. That's what my mom would have said. And I think you'd have liked my mom. The letter appeared on local news that evening. Within hours, it went viral. Protests formed outside the courthouse, veterans groups and child advocacy organizations marching together under banners reading, "Free the Sentinels and Children First paperwork." Second, public pressure mounted. The prosecutor received death threats and marriage proposals in equal measure, depending on which side of the debate people occupied. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Prosecution painted the Sentinels as vigilantes who'd undermined lawful authority and taken justice into their own hands, setting dangerous precedent for anyone who disagreed with proper procedures. Angela painted them as men who'd acted when authority failed, catastrophically saving lives that bureaucracy would have sacrificed to maintain procedural purity. Katie testified in open court this time, her voice steady, as she described that afternoon on Willow Highway, when 6 men on motorcycles had stopped for a girl nobody else would have noticed. Did these men ever threaten you or make you feel unsafe? No. Did they scare you when you first saw them? Ma'am, they look as scary, big and old and rough with leather and beards and motorcycles. But my mom told me scary looks can protect you. Scary actions hurt you. These men only looked scary. They acted kind. There's a difference, Opinando. The prosecutor tried different angles during cross-examination. Katie, these men took you from a licensed foster home without proper authorization. Doesn't that concern you? Katie looked at him with those eyes that had seen too much. You mean, did they kidnap me? No. They rescued me. again. Because the first time wasn't enough when bad people found out where I was, and the system couldn't protect me. Every angle the prosecution tried died against Katie's simple truth. When she stepped down after 2 hours of testimony, 3 jurors were crying openly. Hawk took the stand on day 14. Angela led him through events, methodically establishing timeline and motivation with prosecutorial precision, turned toward defense. Then she asked the question that would define the entire case. Mr. Morrison, why didn't you simply turn Katie over to authorities and trust the system to handle the situation? Because the system was already compromised. A deputy sheriff was on Vincent Cole's payroll, feeding him information about Katie's location. Child Protective Services had been infiltrated by someone expediting transfer paperwork that would have put Katie directly into Vincent's hands. And a 9-year-old girl was 48 hours from being sold into sexual slavery while everyone followed proper procedures. I couldn't let that happen. None of us could. Even knowing you might spend the rest of your life in prison for this decision, Hawk looked directly at the jury, especially knowing that, because some things matter more than personal consequences. Katie Sullivan matters more than my freedom. She matters more than proper channels and jurisdictional disputes and waiting for the right paperwork to clear the right desks. She matters because she's a child who asked for help from the only people who were there to answer. And we answered. The prosecutor's cross-examination attacked from every conceivable angle. Prior incident is from military service, planning that showed premeditation rather than spontaneous response. The fact that Hawk had killed a man even in defense of others. Hawk absorbed it without flinching, acknowledging past mistakes, but never retreating from central truth. You killed Vincent Cole. I stopped Vincent Cole from killing a child. If you can't see the difference, I can't explain it to you. The jury deliberated for 4 days. Hawk and the other sentinels waited in county lockup, passing time with card games and not discussing what conviction would mean for men their age with their health problems. On the morning of the 5th day, word came that a verdict had been reached. The courtroom packed beyond fire code capacity, spectators lining walls and spilling into hallways. Katie sat in the front row between Angelo Duro and Dorothy Davis, the foster mother who'd defied protocol to help extract her. Sheriff Martinez attended in dress uniform. Doc's estranged son had flown in from Chicago, their relationship strained but not completely severed. Dutch's daughter held his hand despite the shackles binding his wrists. Will the defendants please rise? Hawk stood his brother standing with him. The jury foreman was a retired postal worker, a grandmother who'd spent 40 years delivering mail through neighborhoods ranging from affluent to terrifying and learned things about people that statistics never captured. On the charge of kidnapping, we find the defendants not guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, we find the defendants not guilty. On the charge of assault, we find the defendants not guilty. On the charge of manslaughter, we find the defendant, James Morrison, not guilty. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Judge Reyes's gavel cracked like rifle fire, demanding order that took 5 full minutes to restore. When silence finally returned, she addressed the sentinels directly, her expression carrying weight of 32 years, adjudicating human behavior at its worst and occasionally its best. Gentlemen, you walk a dangerous line between justice and vigilantism. I want to be absolutely clear that this verdict is specific to these extraordinary circumstances and should not be interpreted as blanket permission for citizens to act outside legal authority. That said, you acted when our system failed catastrophically. You saved 14 children from unspeakable fates. You dismantled a criminal network that law enforcement had been unable to touch. While I cannot officially sanction your methods, I can acknowledge the outcome. You are free to go. Katie ran to Hawk before bailiffs could object, and he caught her in an embrace that lifted her off the ground. For the first time since that afternoon on Willow Highway, she sobbed without fear underlying the tears, just relief and exhaustion, and the kind of emotional release that only came when safety finally felt real. Angela joined them, wrapping her arms around both, and for a moment, 3 people formed something that looked like family beginning to heal. Preacher's memorial service took place on a gray November morning that matched the mood, if not the meaning. Full military honors despite controversy, his 20 years of service earning what his final actions had nearly cost. The cemetery sprawled across a hillside overlooking the Columbia River, rows of white headstones marching in formation that would never break. A Marine honor guard folded the flag with mechanical precision, each crease perfect according to regulations that had been followed at thousands of funerals before this one. They presented it to preacher's daughter, Michelle, who'd flown in from Atlanta, carrying 20 years of unresolved anger that her father's death had finally answered in ways his life never had. Hawk delivered the eulogy wearing dress blues that didn't quite fit anymore, the uniform a size too small across shoulders, and loose in the waist where time had redistributed mass according to its own calculations. Thomas Cole believed in nonviolence. He marched with Dr. King through streets where that could get you killed. He registered voters in Mississippi when police stood by watching Klansmen burn crosses. He spent 40 years preaching peace and demonstrating for it and organizing communities around it. His voice carried across assembled mourners, veterans, and civil rights activists standing together in shared grief that transcended the divisions usually separating them. And in his last act, Thomas picked up a weapon to defend a child from men who would have destroyed her. Some might call that hypocrisy or betrayal of his principles. I call it the truest expression of his values he could have given. Peace isn't passivity. Peace is the absence of fear. And Thomas ensured Katie Sullivan would live without fear of the men who wanted to hurt her. He died for her peace. That's not contradiction. That's completion of a life lived fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Katie placed a sunflower on the casket, the bright yellow jarring against military formality and gray skies. She whispered words too quiet for others to hear, then stepped back into Angela's arms. The rifle salute cracked 3 times across the cemetery. Taps played the notes floating across the river and disappearing into distance. The flag was folded and presented to Michelle, who held it like the weight of her father's entire life had been compressed into a triangle of cloth. Thomas Cole went into the ground carrying knowledge that his final stand had meant something beyond speeches and protests. He'd stood between evil and innocence, and evil had lost. Angela's adoption petition moved through family court with speed unusual for bureaucracies that typically measured time in geological epochs. Katie's clear preference helped. The circumstances that had brought them together helped more. Judge Reyes, the same one who'd presided over the criminal trial, signed the final papers in her chambers with advice delivered in private. Ms. Morrison, this child has been through trauma that would shatter most adults. She'll need therapy. Stability, patience measured in years, not weeks. Are you prepared for that reality? Angela's hand found Katie's and held it. I'm a single mother with 2 kids already and an ex-husband who lives in another state and barely makes support payments. My practice runs on court appointments and pro bono work that doesn't pay bills. I'm absolutely not prepared. But neither were the Sentinels when they stopped on that highway and they saved her anyway. Sometimes being unprepared just means you're willing to try anyway. Katie moved into Angela's house in Portland's Laurelhurst neighborhood 2 days before Thanksgiving. The room had been hastily prepared furniture from IKEA, assembled by Dutch and Doc during an afternoon that involved more profanity than instruction manuals typically anticipated. Sophia and Marcus treated Katie like a sister they'd been waiting for their entire lives, showing her everything from best hiding spots in the backyard to the neighbor's cat who would allow petting if you brought tuna. Hawk helped Katie unpack possessions that fit in 2 boxes with room to spare. She placed her mother's photograph on the nightstand, Saint's rosary beside it, Chief's turquoise stone in a small dish Angela had provided. Dutch's dog tags went around her neck, hidden under her shirt, where they rested against her heart. This feels different than the foster homes. Angela's voice came from the doorway. That's because this isn't temporary. This is home for as long as you want it, which I hope is forever, but that's your choice to make. What if I mess up? What if I'm too broken? Then you mess up and we help you unmess it and we keep going. That's what family does. We mess up and forgive each other and keep trying. Being broken doesn't disqualify you from family. It qualifies you for being human. Thanksgiving dinner required 2 tables pushed together and chairs borrowed from 3 different neighbors. Angela Sophia Marcus, Katie Hawk, Doc Dutch. Saint and Chief crowded into a dining room designed for maybe 6 people if they liked each other enough to sit close. Dutch's arm remained in a sling. Chief used a cane. Saint's limp would probably never fully disappear. But they were alive, which made them luckier than Preacher. His absence hung in the air like a guest nobody wanted to acknowledge, but everyone felt. Katie helped Angela cook, learning to make stuffing and time side dishes, so everything finished simultaneously. The domestic normalcy felt strange after weeks of crisis, but good strange, the kind of different that suggested healing might actually be possible with enough time and effort. How many plates do we need? Angela counted on her fingers. Let's see. Me, the kids, Katie, Dad, Doc Dutch, St. Chief. That's 10 people. We'll need every dish we own, and some we'll have to borrow. That's a lot of people. That's family. Sometimes family is biology. Sometimes it's choice. Ours is both now. Hawk led Grace's voice steady despite emotions threatening to overwhelm composure. Lord, we've been soldiers and sinners and survivors. We've made mistakes that can't be unmade and lived through things we wish we could forget. But today, we're just grateful. For second chances we didn't earn. For family we didn't expect. For this food and these people and the fact that we're here to share it. And for a little girl who reminded us what we're meant to be. Amen. Amens echoed around the table. Food passed in comfortable chaos, conversations, overlapping, laughter, breaking out at Dutch's terrible jokes about his homeland that nobody understood but everyone pretended were funny out of affection. Katie sat between Sophia and Hawk, her plate piled higher than she could possibly eat, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe enough to stop watching doors and windows for threats. 6 months passed in the kind of routine that only looked boring to people who'd never experienced sustained crisis. Katie started therapy twice weekly, working through trauma that would take years to fully process but could be managed in the meantime. She excelled in school, her teachers noting the kind of determination that suggested she'd fight for every grade as proof of survival. Angela juggled work and parenting with Hawk's help. He'd moved into a small apartment 15 minutes away, but spent most days at the house anyway, building a relationship with grandchildren he'd never expected to meet. The assignment came home on a Friday in late April, write about your hero and present to the class. Katie worked on it for a week, refusing help despite Angela's offers. When presentation day arrived, she brought all 5 surviving sentinels to school, 5 old men squeezing into chairs designed for 9-year-olds, while 4th graders stared with the fascination children reserve for anything genuinely unusual. Most kids think heroes wear capes or badges or fly through the sky, but my heroes ride motorcycles. They're old. They have scars. Some of them limp. Their hands shake sometimes in the morning but before coffee. But when I needed help, they stopped. When I needed protecting, they fought. When I needed family, they stayed. She gestured to each sentinel, introducing them by name and telling abbreviated versions of their stories. Wars they'd fought, places they'd been, reasons they'd become the men they were. Heroes aren't perfect people who never make mistakes. They're just people who choose to act when others won't. These are my heroes, the Iron Sentinels, and because of them, I'm here, alive, safe, home. And that's what heroes do. They bring people home. The presentation sparks something larger than one classroom. News coverage of Katie's recovery and the Sentinels' vindication inspired other veterans organizations to start child protection initiatives. The Iron Sentinel Initiative formed as a nonprofit connecting at-risk youth with veteran mentors who understood trauma because they carried their own. Hawk became the reluctant face of the movement, giving interviews that always redirected attention back to children who still needed help. Angela's practice expanded into defending other complicated cases where good people made hard choices when systems failed them. She won some and lost others, but built a reputation for taking clients. Everyone else refused because someone had to stand up for people the system was designed to grind down. The anniversary of that day on Willow Highway arrived with the same gray October weather that had framed the original timeline. Hawk called Katie early, asking if she wanted to take a ride. She was waiting on the porch when his motorcycle pulled up, helmet already strapped, wearing a leather jacket Angela had bought her that looked like a smaller version of the Sentinels' vests. 5 motorcycles rolled east out of Portland, information Katie, on the back of Hawk's bike, with her arms wrapped tight around him. The highway looked the same as it had a year ago. Empty, forgotten, the kind of road that led nowhere important unless you understood that everywhere was important when someone needed help. They stopped at the exact spot where Katie had emerged from the woods, where everything had changed for all of them. A small wooden cross stood where Dutch had planted it months ago, preacher's name carved into the horizontal beam. Wildflowers grew around it, blooming without anyone tending them. Katie placed fresh sunflowers she'd brought from home, arranging them carefully around the memorial. Do you think about that day a lot? Hawk remained on his bike, hands resting on grips. Every single day. Can't help it. Changed everything. Me too. Scared memories, but also the day I found my family. Both things can be true at the same time. That's wisdom most people take a lifetime to learn. You got there at 9. Katie walked back to the bike, her hand finding his arm. Do you think there are other kids like me out there right now, scared and alone? Yes, probably thousands of them. Will someone help them? If they're lucky, yes. If they're not lucky enough to be helped, then I guess we'll just have to keep riding this highway. Keep stopping, keep listening, keep standing up when everyone else walks past. The engines started together sound no longer frightening Katie, but instead promising protection she could finally believe in. They rode toward Portland as a weak sunlight broke through clouds, illuminating the pavement ahead in ways that made the ordinary road look almost sacred. Behind them, the memorial stood silent witness to sacrifice that had meaning. Ahead, the highway curved into distance where other children might be waiting for promises to be kept. What matters doesn't fade. It just finds new forms, new battles, new reasons to keep standing when standing seems impossible. The road stretched empty before them now, but none of them believed it would stay that way forever. Because that's what people who've learned the cost of looking away do. They keep their eyes open. They stay ready. They answer when the call comes, regardless of personal cost. And sometimes that answer makes all the difference between a child lost and a child saved. Between darkness winning and light finding a foothold. Between systems that fail and human beings who refuse to let those failures be final. 5 old warriors and 1 young survivor rode into Portland as afternoon gave way to evening. The city lights began to glow like promises that some things were worth fighting for, worth standing for, worth the price that standing always demanded. Behind them, Willow Highway returned to silence, but it would remember. Roads always do. They remember every decision made when turning back wasn't an option. Every moment when ordinary people became something more because someone needed them to be. And that memory would be there waiting for the next time it was needed.